Okay, friends, we are back together and ready for this wonderful plenary number 2 with Kay Cotan. So I'm going to invite you to fasten your seat belts and get ready for this next session with Kay. And come on up, Kay.
Welcome back from lunch. I had asked Bishop Mueller, and I were talking. I said, do you think maybe we should take off everybody's bread and potato chips and, that kind of thing so that nobody would be on carb overload after lunch? So y'all didn't eat your bread, right? All right, so you drank a lot of caffeine instead then? All right, so let's, wow. Wouldn't you know we're going to get tied up here? There we go. We are working again. All right. So this afternoon we're going to talk about how to prepare for guests. How to prepare for guests. Now, think about guest and think about visitor. Okay, let's first draw distinctions around those two terms. So, how many of you have visitor parking in your parking lot? All right. Do you know some sign companies? All right. So, think about your home on a Friday night. It's just been a long work week. And you've had the Friday night pizza, right? Don't y'all have Friday night pizza so you don't have to cook? And you have just sat down in the recliner and you've popped your feet up and it happens. The doorbell rings. And another family member might be sitting there and you go, are you going to get it? Oh, I thought you'd go get it. Do we have to get it? Are you expecting anybody? No, I'm not expecting anybody. Could we ignore it? I mean, who could it be? So one of you finally slept to the front door, and, the pizza box is still out. You haven't thrown the paper plates away. It's Friday night, right? You don't have to do dishes, right? Am I the only one? All right. So it's a neighbor, right? You weren't expecting them, but you knew them. And so maybe you open the door and you walk out onto the porch. Or maybe you might invite them in just into the entry because, your bathrooms aren't clean, right? And the kitchen isn't clean. You weren't expecting company. Visitors just drop by unexpectedly. And I really wanted to watch Shark Tank that night. I really didn't want to expect anybody from my neighborhood. And so you hurry along in the conversation because you had other plans. Now, what does that look like in a church? Are you expecting visitors to drop by? Or are we preparing for guests each and every Sunday? And I know it's just a word, but the word has so much more meaning. Now, let's flip back to our home. And we have invited someone to our home. We've invited a guest. We also are anticipating this guest. And we make special preparations for this guest. Like clean the house, like put fresh linens on the bed, like have the dog groomed. All of those special things when we're having company. We might even prepare their special dessert, their favorite meal. We love them, we care about them, we are expecting and anticipating their arrival. Rather than sitting in the lazy boy thinking, do we have to answer the door or not, you might even be peeking out the window waiting for them to come. Now let's flip back over to the church. Are we anticipating guests every Sunday? Are we making special preparations to receive guests each and every Sunday? So yeah, it's just a word, but it's also a different way of anticipating and looking forward to and preparing for receiving new people. Now, this morning we talked about building new relationships. So imagine going through all of those steps and building a relationship with a new person, and for them to walk in and have a subpar experience. Now, my bishop, Bishop Snazy, says radical hospitality. We have been shown radical hospitality here this weekend, have we not? Thank you. Do we show radical hospitality on Sunday? Because radical goes above and beyond expectations. There are just certain things about today's life that you just expect, that people would be friendly, that people would speak to you, that they'd hope they'd find your way around. Those are to be expected. That's not radical hospitality. That's just kind of manners in today's world. But yet, many of our churches stop there. We have to be willing to show radical hospitality each and every Sunday in preparation for guests. A guest is someone honored. A guest is someone we're looking forward to. It isn't just by happenstance that somebody drops in. We are preparing and anticipating. So, when we are ready, we're locked up again. Sorry, folks. When we are preparing our church to receive guests, there's several things that we have to think about, all right? First of all, folks, leadership matters. And I'm not talking just about the pastor. I'm talking about laity leadership as well. So one of the things we have to think about is, how are we strategically planning to receive guests? And more importantly, how are we strategically planning to be a missional church? Remember, we talked about a missional church this morning is a church that does everything based on how are we doing with making disciples. And so my challenge to you is to consider at every board meeting and every council meeting, are you talking about that? Are we really talking about the business of the church? And the business of the church is making disciples? Or are we concentrating on paint colors and sidewalk repairs? I know that's probably a Missouri thing too that we just have trouble with. But folks, are we really talking about the purpose in which we exist? If we're doing that, it helps to think about strategic ministry planning. It's one of my favorite topics to talk on. I was just leading some of our pastors in a workshop this last 3 weekends in 3 different locations throughout the state. And I can almost get as passionate about strategic ministry planning as I can about evangelism. But first of all, we have to clearly understand the purpose in our church, and that is to make disciples, and that we lead people through everything in our church based on our purpose. That means the preferences of one another are no longer how we're guiding our church, but it's on our faithfulness in reaching people. Then we have to figure out what's our vision. And you're going, oh my God, visioning again? How many of you just had that that feeling in your stomach going, didn't we just do that? Because every one of you have the same mission of making disciples. So then why didn't every church look the same? It's because each church is different. And the vision is the unique way that you make disciples. It's what calls you into the future. My guess is if you've had a vision before and you just had that feeling when I mentioned the word, you probably haven't had a compelling vision statement before. A compelling vision statement gives you energy. It gives you momentum. It gives you something to look forward to work towards. It legitimizes leadership. It creates generosity. And if your vision statement isn't doing that, you probably don't have a good one. One of the things that I talk about when you're looking at your vision is you've got to identify 3 things. Remember, go back to Mission Insight. You got to know your community. And here's the things you need to know about your community. What are the needs of your community? Not in our Christian bubble, but what are the true needs? Have you talked to that counselor at school? Have you talked to the mayor? Have you talked to the fire chief? And here's the questions you ask them. So tell me, what are the greatest needs of our community? And how do you think the church might be helpful there? And here's a follow-up question. And what do you know about our church? You might be surprised at what people's perceptions are of your church. Sometimes when we send mystery worshipers into churches, we ask them to go to area businesses and ask for directions. Out of 12 people that go in within a mile of the church, a mile or less of the church, usually 3/4 of the mystery worshipers cannot find someone on first asking where the church is. They may not even recognize the name of it, let alone be able to give directions or tell you what they are known for in the community. You know, we have churches closed from time to time for a variety of reasons. But what breaks my heart is that we have yet for a community to call in and say, you know what? What happened to that church? We really miss that church. The impact that they have is no longer here. They've left a hole in the community. That doesn't happen, folks, because the churches that are closing have lost that impact on their community. So what are you known for in your community? And I hope it's positive. There was one church that was known for baking pies. Now, I know us Methodists do potluck like nobody else. But is that what we want to be known for in our community, as the best pie makers? 11 out of the 12 people in that community could not find directions for the name of that church. But one person knew them and said, oh yes, I go to their pie fundraiser every year and buy a pie. What are you known for? So we've got to know the needs of our community. And folks, please get beyond the basic. Now, I'm not saying that food and clothing and shelter are not important. Please don't hear that. But there are so much deeper levels of need. Do you know how people are lonely and hopeless? People that are struggling with addiction, people that are struggling with financial problems, people that are struggling with parenting, the sandwich generation. We could go on, but we get stuck with food and shelter and clothing. How can we go deeper? And we can only go deeper when we really know our community and what their needs are. The second piece that you need to understand is, what are the gifts of your congregation? Each of you has a different congregation with a different giftedness. Are you playing to those strengths? I had one church one time that they desperately wanted to do something new. And they decided that they were going to do a Mother's Day Out program. Well, folks, I'm not sure that they were playing to their giftedness, because it was 12 ladies over the age of 80. Heart was in the right place, but was that in their giftedness at this point? Right? So many times we say, well, this church down the road is doing this, so we should be doing that. Maybe, but maybe not. Because where is our giftedness? And then the third piece is, we have got to understand where the passions of our leaders are. Passion will drive. We were talking yesterday in a meeting, where are the fire starters? Where's the smoke? Find the smoke. And can we build a fire from that passion of our leaders? So needs of our community, the gifts of our congregation, and the passions of our leaders, in the intersection of those three comes the vision for your church. The vision is not a head process, folks. It's not like sitting around a corporate table saying, what are the best words? Can we put it on a bumper sticker? Vision is something that comes from the soul of where God is calling your church. And you can't do that sitting around a table. You've got to be out in your community, immersing yourself in the community. There needs to be prayer walks involved. There needs to be discernment involved. But please don't take 6 months to do it. If you take that long to do it, it will probably be irrelevant by the time you finish up the words. But you can't wait and do it every 5 years. Our world is changing so quickly now, you have to do visioning probably every 2 to 3 years. So visioning is very, very important. But if you have one right now and you go, but we just did it, but it's not doing anything, then we probably did it from the head instead of the heart. Or we haven't shared it. We haven't shared it. So many times we put it on a piece of paper, we put it on the bulletin, we put it on the website, and somehow then we have cast the vision. How's that working for you? So the other parts of strategic planning are goals. So what are the goals of the church? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you're going to do as a church as a whole to live into that preferred future of your vision? And then board, you with me? Do I have any board members here? Then that's what we talk about at the board meetings. We don't talk about paint colors. We have other ways of getting that done. It's called permission giving. Really? If the dishwasher in the parsonage goes out, can we just not replace it without having to have a meeting about it? And really, if the pastor and wife or wife and husband want stainless steel, then give them stainless steel. Who cares? That is not where we need to be spending our time and energy. We need to be wondering, how are we reaching new people? How are we living into our vision? And are we accomplishing these 3 to 5 things that we said as leadership we're going to do this year? And then we circle our resources around that. And that's people, that's dollars, that's time, that's energy, that's focus. Please don't copy the calendar from this year to the next. Let's be more intentional. My 2 words this year seems like they're strategic and intentional. Let's not play church anymore. Let's be strategic and let's be intentional. I don't care what size church you are, you have limited resources. So let's quit playing church and let's be intentional and strategic with how we're using those resources. And if you're saying, oh, and I lost them, my young people in the front. What does that say? Oh, they found girls is why. All right, they're there. Thank you for coming back. I couldn't see you for the lights. Whew. You were making me a little nervous. Glad you're back. The worst thing you can do is have a millennial come in and say, would you serve on a committee? Now, in past, that's the way we got people involved. Our young people want to do things that make a difference. And I'm sorry, but sitting in meetings so many times in our churches make no difference. So part of it is redesigning meetings so that they're purposeful, they're intentional, they're strategic. And we can do meetings in a lot of different ways, like Skype, like Facebook, an old-fashioned email kind of something. We can do the work of the church in a much more modern way because, we used to have socialization around our meetings. That's how we caught up with one another. Our young folks, they can do so many other things to catch up with other people socially. They don't want to come and meet. But you know what? I don't care if you're 12 or 20 or 50 or 70 or 100. If you're coming to a meeting and you all are talking about the number of people we're reaching, the new faces that are showing up, how we're living into our preferred future, that gets people excited. Much more than sidewalks. We have to change the conversation with our leadership in order to change the culture of the church. And then leave the objectives up to the ministry teams. So in other words, boards, you don't manage the church, you govern the church. Allow your pastors and your staff, and I know some of you say we don't have staff. How many of you just thought that? Yeah, you do, it's just unpaid. But allow those ministry team leaders to figure out how to do things. Let's not micromanage. Let's set the course and say, how can we support you and encourage you and get out of their way? And now let's stand on the balcony and talk about, so how are we doing in making disciples? Rather than micromanaging our ministries. So we have to get back to equipping people to do ministry. So many times we throw tasks at people and say, just say yes. Just say yes. And then you hand it to them and go, oh, you know what to do. How hard could it be? It's church work, or good enough for church work. Or sometimes we get to our nominations. Again, this is probably a Missouri thing. But we get to nominations in the fall, and we're going, okay, so who are we going to get to serve? And what do? We get out the pictorial and go, well, I think I could get them to say yes. Well, I could get them to say yes. Well, so-and-so, Sue, you should call them because they wouldn't say no to you. And then we make the phone calls and we say, I just need your name on the form. You won't have to do anything. I really haven't been in your churches. We are all a lot more alike than we think we are. Right? But what if leadership looked different? What if we weren't just holding chairs at tables, but we really understood that we as leaders of the church are accountable to Christ for our churches being faithful servants and bringing people to know Christ. Think about that, leaders. Think about that. It isn't just about being good stewards of the money. It isn't just about doing the supervisory work for pastors and filling out evaluations and being the liaison to your DS. It is your responsibility and furthermore your privilege of being the church in your mission field that is responsible for that 70% of people who don't have a relationship with Christ. Folks, that is our focus, and it needs to start at the top. Because if the board isn't having that conversation, then tell me who is. Let's no longer be a reporting entity. Let's be an entity that is accountable to Christ for bringing new people. That will change the conversation, at your board table, guaranteed. So pastors, when you're going to do visioning, you're going to be sick of casting the vision statement. I'm just going to tell you. About the time that you are sick and tired of it is just about the time that people are beginning to catch the spirit of it. So you've got to preach it and 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 preach it till you see it in action. So much of what we do in church is we make these technical changes, but we never do the adaptive things. Those technical things of remodeling, the technical things of, just hire more staff. But we don't choose to live into adaptive changes because the adaptive changes are uncomfortable. The adaptive changes who we are. The adaptive change gets to our culture and our DNA. And that is not something that we necessarily run towards. But folks, if we're going to be faithful and we're going to be servants of Christ, we have to live into a different way of being and doing. And pastors, we got to preach it till we see it. All right. So there are lots and lots of different connection strategies, and we don't have a lot of time, but you got in your little book there, or in your little bag, y'all got a book, right? And so there's a lot of the things that you're going to see today that are in the book, or they might be on the slide, but we don't go over. But guaranteed if they're on the slide, they're going to be in your book. Okay, so don't panic if I slip over something, all right? Y'all okay with that? Just breathe if I skip over. All right. So there are lots of different ways of connection strategies for churches, and some of them are old. They're old strategies of bringing new people in or inviting people to church, but some of them still work. But see, sometimes we're not intentional in the way we do it. Like, okay, well, we're going to bring a friend to church Sunday. Great idea. But how did we build up to that? How did we equip for that? So in other words, you start 4 weeks in advance and you say, I'd like for you to pray about who God might be calling you to reach out to. Pray this next week and see who God's putting in your pathway. And then maybe the next week we call them during worship to write the name down and begin to pray over that specific name. And then in the third week, we ask them to issue an invitation to be my guest, in worship. And you bring them in on your elbow. And then we have a huge, over-the-top, radical hospitality and seeker-friendly worship service. Do you see that all has to be strategic in the way we do it? I mean, we don't want to come in and have some real heady kind of sermon that seeker-friendly folks can't identify with. It's got to be relevant, and it's got to be something that makes a difference in their life on Monday morning. But you see, we just don't say, let's bring a friend on Sunday. But it's strategic and intentional in the way that we think through these things. Which is another reason, guys, that we cannot copy over the calendar. Things need to flow and fit depending on other things that are going on in the life of the congregation. And that may mean the annual chili cook-off may not happen. What? Sorry, another seatbelt moment with no warning. But we've always done it that way. That's right. And we've always had it on the second Saturday night of January, right? Gosh, what was I thinking? I'm going to tell a story of my church. Now, I'm not going to tell you the name of my church. Right? I'm far enough away from home that this isn't going to get back, right? Right? Okay. We learn from one another. It's a teaching moment. Okay? It's the chili supper. So, in January, there's a particular Sunday school class that has the best of intentions of doing a chili cook-off, right? It's a community event. How is it a community event? Well, we put a sign out. So who's invited? Well, the neighbors. What's the intention? What is the intended outcome? Yeah, we're going to do a mission project with that. Well, who would be benefiting? Oh, we'll decide that later. Like reaching new folks? Yeah, that's it. Okay, so we're going to do this for evangelism dollars. So it really isn't an outreach. It's a fundraiser, folks. Let's just name it. Why do we disguise these as something else? Okay, now get this. All right, so I'm from the neighborhood, and I come in the front door, and it's the first thing that I see. The cashier. Oh, but it's a free will offering. Do you see all the other dollars in the basket? And did I really know that I was invited to have a free meal? Well, no, because it's $5 all you can eat chili plus dessert. And then what happens? I go to the next table and there is a line of great cooks that say, do you want chili, spicy, or would you like to have corn chowder? And they serve you the soup. And then I go to the next table, and which delicious dessert. This is not the pie church, by the way. The delicious dessert, and you pick that up, right? And then what happens? I go into the table by myself. Because here's the thing is, all the people are lined up behind tables doing good deeds. No one is open for a new relationship. No one has any room on their Lego block for me. But wait, you took my $5, so you're now going to try to use that $5 to do ministry to reach me. How likely is that after you've just treated me like a stranger? See, we had the opportunity, but we chose to be worker bees rather than relationship builders. And how many times do we do that? I was working with another church, and they were doing a back-to-school bash. They're a church that was worshiping 80. And they had more than 300 children and parents on their parking lot doing great things. Lots of cool activities, and they were all serving ice cream and hot dogs and popcorn and face painting. But everyone was standing behind a table. And no one had the job of radical hospitality. No one had the job of being there to build relationships with these people because we were too worried about the doing. And we never thought through the relationship building opportunity there. Now, don't get me wrong. When we know better, we do better. These people had the best of intentions. Their hearts were in the right place. They wanted to reach new people, but it's the things that we didn't think through to be strategic and intentional that would have made all the difference in the world. Those are the things we need to be thinking about. When someone comes into your building, is it intuitive on how to find things? Right? The number of churches where we have of What door do I go in? And I always say we need to have 3 layers of hospitality before anyone ever gets to their seat in your worship experience. 3 touches. And I don't mean that literally. I get it. Safe sanctuary. Okay? Outside, at the exterior door, at the sanctuary door. And if you have a building that is hard to maneuver between all of those places, then you'll need to add more layers. And then we have to build a culture of hospitality so that once they're sitting in the seat, they're not ignored. Because again, go back to this morning, we've had this long process of relationship building. And then maybe we had a great hospitality experience. And then we ignored them the rest of the time. We find that many of our mystery worshipers do okay before worship. But here's the thing. After worship, we're ready for lunch. And we forget that we still have guests amongst us. And they're ignored. So when someone comes into your church, I need to know where to park. Easily know where to park. I hope I have guest parking. I know there's some signage problems today. And then I need to know which entrance to come in. Boy, I could tell you some stories about that. And then I need to know 3 things. I need to know where the bathrooms are. I need to know where the children's stuff is. And I need to know where worship takes place. Now, I hope I don't have to find that on my own, but your signage should be at least covering those 3 things. Okay? Children, restrooms, sanctuary. Bare minimum for directional signage. Now, please don't put the signs on the wall. When you put the signs on the wall, you cannot see them when you're approaching. Signs that are hung up top perpendicularly are the best. Okay? Have someone who is not familiar with your building go through and just give you their thoughts about how hospitable your church is or not. And be open to hearing that. It's not a criticism. It's just we become blind to it ourselves. Once you're in a building for a couple of weeks and familiar with it, you are then an insider and you can't see it. You know, just like some of that wallpaper that peels off at your house, starts in the corner, and before long it's a big old corner, but you didn't notice it because it happened a little bit at a time, and you see it all the time, so now you don't see it at all. That's kind of the way it is with our buildings and our churches too. So get some outside eyes and perspective on what is it like to be a guest and maneuver through your building. We have to move hospitality to the front door. Okay, now, I know there are some building limitations. I get that. But sometimes we got to be creative. One church, when the weather is nice, their hospitality is actually outside their front door because they didn't have the space in their narthex, which, y'all, that's insider language too. I hope you know that. Right? Move it to the front door so that people experience it from the beginning. Don't just say coffee, but take people to the coffee pot and pour them a cup of coffee and invite them into a conversation. Hospitality, radical hospitality. Ask people to sit with you in worship. It's just going on beyond. It's just taking the next step. And it's having people treat one another as though they are anticipating guests each and every Sunday. And because of that, they're on the lookout. Now, we have to be careful we don't overwhelm them. I had one mystery worshiper go to a church, and she walked in with a toddler and a baby in a baby carriage. Okay? And she said, I walked in, and she said, I don't think they've seen a child amongst them in a very long time. I said, really? So tell me what happened. And she said, they were like swarmed around me, like I couldn't move. It's like, what's that? And then she said, this was the strange part. She said they kept saying, the nursery's down the hall. And someone else would come and say, the nursery's down the hall. And someone else came up to her and said, the nursery's down the hall. So what she heard was, my children are not welcome in worship. They had the best of intentions. They were trying to help her. But because of what they were saying, and it was repeated so many times, it gave a very different message. So we have to think through what we're saying and how it's being received. Rather than saying, man, it is so great to see you. It's so wonderful to see small children. We love the giggles and cries of children in worship. You are welcome to take them in with you. But if you would rather, there's also a nursery available. It's by far your choice and whatever you're most comfortable with. We just got to say those things. We know it, but they don't know it. And sometimes we got to have connection systems. So that means, who was the person that is their friend for the day, who is going to take those next steps, introduce them to the pastor, give them a building tour, give them information about the church? There needs to be a go-to person so that we don't overwhelm. We have a culture of hospitality, but we don't overwhelm them. One of the best books that I've seen recently on hospitality is called Clip In. Clip In, it's a bicycle metaphor, and it's written by Jim Osier out of Texas. And it's not just about the steps to do hospitality, but it's about creating this culture. It goes so far as, how do we become a culture, or a church with a culture that's recommended? So even if I'm unchurched, I would know about your church in the community, and if anyone ever talked about church, I go, oh yeah, St. James. I've heard wonderful things about them. It's going that deep into hospitality. So here is a whole big old laundry list of things to think about in your building, okay? We've talked about exterior signage. Okay, this is a seatbelt moment. Okay, so ushers, I'm trying to lead with grace. Ushers, you are part of hospitality. Okay, so ushers are not separate from hospitality. So ushers are those first impression people. Make sure our ushers have giftedness in hospitality. It's more than handing a bulletin and taking up the offering. Because again, think about, we've built this relationship over time. And we did the radical hospitality outside and the exterior doors. And then we don't have such a good experience right inside the worship service. And we killed all of that. And it happens. And I think it's because we don't include ushers in our hospitality training and equipping and expectations. I see them all as one collective team, not greeters and ushers. Okay, breathe. Everybody all right? I said it with love. All right? The nursery. Your nursery needs to be the cleanest, most up-to-date building or place in your building. It needs to be near the worship space. People don't want their children in another building or down the hall and around the corner and down the steps. You know, and in some churches I've been in, it's our offices that have the prime space in our building. The nursery needs to be clean, up to date. Now, I'm just stepping into it deep, okay? You know that designated parking you gave me? Maybe we need to go pull that so they don't know where I parked. Sometimes we have the best of intentions to say we have this old TV or this old couch, and we're going to donate it to the church. I just don't need to finish, do I? And they end up in the youth room. Like the youth room needs any more of a hint of a smell. Remember, I have a 20-year-old son. I get it. So, churches, we can say no. And I encourage us to say no. So, when we are donating things to go in the nursery, sometimes those have recalls on them, and they're no longer considered safe. So, just invest in the latest things for your nursery. That is not a place to cut any corners. Okay? Safe sanctuary, we have to have a check-in and out system. If you do children's time, which we could spend a whole lot of time on that, but if you do children's time, then let the guests know what's happening to their children. They go down to children's time and then they suddenly disappear. Will they be back? Where do I find them again? What are they doing with them? We know, but we don't talk to our guests about that. So everything we do, everything we plan, everything we think about it, we've got to do it from the perspective of a guest. Because remember, we are preparing for and expecting guests each and every Sunday because we're out building new relationships with new people. Now, if you aren't expecting guests and not building relationships, then we will be having a different conversation. But that's not why you're here today. Because you're here today because you do want to reach new people. So, relationships matter. We have got to get to the point of going from outsider to guest. You do that through relationship building. And then we go to guest through a connection process to starting our discipleship journey. Right? And then from there, we become a fully committed follower of Christ. And fully committed followers of Christ then reach new people and help them begin the journey back through. Now, if you do nothing else, if you hear nothing else, hear this. If you don't have an outwardly focused prayer team at your church, please go back and begin praying over who are those people to call in. Now, you'll say, but I have a prayer team. It's been my experience that prayer teams are about the joys and the concerns of the congregation. Who is praying for the community? Who is praying for community leaders? Who is praying for the church and reaching new people? We have one church who prays over the new people moving to town. They get that list and they pray over them. If you don't have an outwardly focused prayer team, I encourage you to start there. We get so tangled up in our own stuff that prayer is one of the things that we sometimes forget. So if you only do one thing, and you go home today and think about how are we going to reach new people, and we begin to pray for our community and pray that our church can reach that and that we become open and we begin to get outside of our comfort zones and do a new thing to reach new people, you'll be surprised at what can happen.